when you look at especially the way culture pushes it now, of the level of body fat, those women do not have functioning hormones.
Right.
There's almost no chance. And so I think it can be a very dangerous thing. And men too, especially the bodybuilders, they're close to death when they step on stage. And having that idea that this is what people have to look like, and then saying that bioenergetics is just an excuse to get fat because these it's a hormonally healthy way to eat, I think is missing the mark for sure.
Well, we're back for another discussion. We're going to go into bioenergetics. We're going to explore the world of health and Ray Peat. Is he just another fad? And that's what we're going to get into some of this with our guest today, Just Another Peter. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. We're just going to call this show Just Another Peter, just one after another. We keep having so many folks in the bioenergetic world that have different angles. And I saw you've been very good at posting a lot of interesting quotes from Ray Peat and others. So, again, trying to give voices to folks who are spreading good ideas online. I thought it'd be a good idea to have you on. So, how long have you been in the bioenergetic world?
So I've probably been peating for about a year. It took me probably about 6 months to really digest the ideas, to really start applying them. And once I did, it really changed my life.
Yeah. And now you were telling me before the show, you used to be in the carnivore world or something. And then what happened there?
Yeah, so I tried the carnivore diet because I had heard I had been struggling with a lot of health issues, and I heard that it could be beneficial. And I really accredit that to it lowering endotoxin and serotonin,
Yeah.
because that feeling you get when you first start the carnivore diet where you feel like you're floating or something,
Right.
and you finally have relief from the problems you've been having is incredible, but it really does take a toll on your thyroid and other hormones long term.
Yeah. How do you think the carnivore diet helps reduce endotoxin for people?
Yeah, so it really reduces the amount of digestible fibers for the bacteria that produce endotoxin. Um, and that also helps to reduce serotonin in a similar way, just reducing the gut irritation.
And the reduction in vegetables and grains in particular, right? Yeah.
Yes, and I used to eat buckets of broccoli. I'm not even kidding. Before I went carnivore, and so really changing that was a big deal.
So you did the broccoli diet before carnivore, or what was going on there?
So I was probably just trying to eat healthy, and I heard that you should eat lots of cruciferous vegetables, and I felt okay when I was eating them, but looking back was like I was just digging myself deeper into the hyperthyroid state at that point.
So how did you get into this situation to the point where you felt the need to, go from carnivore to bioenergetic? Where just go through your thought process of your journey there.
It was really an intuitive thing because I hit summer, and I think there's a mechanism in the body where in the summer you really do need more carbohydrates. And it was just this intense craving for fruits and for some sort of energy source other than, just pounds of meat, which
Yeah.
really was not doing it at that point. And I remember when I was listening to carnivore podcasts at the beginning, they would talk about Paul Saladino, like, oh, he's not really carnivore. Um, and eventually I came around to what he was saying. And I know he's kind of a joke in this space now, but him having Georgi Dinkov on his show and just breaking down the actual processes of how the body works versus, oh, just eat meat and it'll magically save you was a big turning point in my journey.
Yeah, a lot of the folks, because I was on radio and I had a lot of the carnivore people on, Sean Baker and Paul Saladino and Michaela Peterson, Jordan Peterson's daughter, and they were all promoting the same thing, and I found them kind of through this common interest of the seed oil issue, but like you said, it seems like it's not a sustainable thing for folks to just eat lots and lots of meat only for year after year. It doesn't seem to be
Yeah.
something that works usually for people.
I think it can be a therapeutic tool. Like I would consider um it as like a way to really reduce the load on the gut. And you could even do some sort of modified carnivore thing where you're really reducing the fiber in your diet and you mostly probably drink juice or have honey along with your meat. I would think that would be more hormonally beneficial while also getting a similar result.
Mhm. Now, do you study nutrition, or are you just doing this as a personal hobby or interest? How does that work?
It's like an obsession for me. I probably listened to thousands of hours of podcasts and read several books by this time. But yeah, it's just a
Yeah.
hobby.
Yeah. So, some folks you've been seeing online as Ray Peat's ideas become more and more crossing over into Twitter and kind of branching out into a broader consciousness. There's been some pushback that, well, Ray Peat stuff is just the latest fad diet. It'll come and go just like everything else. And then you hear often folks saying, well, I don't see a lot of people who are very healthy or have dramatic health before and after photos or whatever on the Ray Peat bioenergetic approach to eating. What do you say to those objections?
Well, to the first that objection that it's a fad, I think Jay at Take Thiamine had a great response. He was like, well, is endocrinology a fad? Is biochemistry a fad? Like are studying the way the body works and actually fueling it a fad? And I think that's a great response because it's true that it's not. And then to the response that they haven't really seen anyone who's healthy, I think you have to look at the context of different people when it comes to that, because you might have someone who's hormonally completely flatlined like I was, and coming to Ray Peat's ideas fix that completely. And especially when I was estrogen dominant as a young girl and growing up, Ray Peat's ideas kind of gave me a context and a lens to look through that and to actually have a solution. But I think another objection that they'll have is, oh, it's just an excuse for guys to get fat or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be there. But if you look at many of the leaders in the bioenergetic space, like Tyler Woodward or Analyze and Optimize, that is not their idea. Their idea is resolve your chronic health issues and use these principles to live a fulfilling life while also being in good shape. The goal is not to be completely shredded so that you have no hormonal function, but the goal is to have health so you can live a fulfilling life.
Right. Now you said shredded to the point where you have no hormonal function. How do you connect those two things?
Well, especially for women, when you look at especially the way culture pushes it now, of the level of body fat, those women do not have functioning hormones.
Right.
There's almost no chance. And so I think it can be a very dangerous thing. And men too, especially the bodybuilders, they're close to death when they step on stage. And having that idea that this is what people have to look like, and then saying that bioenergetics is just an excuse to get fat because it's a hormonally healthy way to eat, I think is missing the mark for sure.
Yeah, and I'd like to see a lot of those people who are criticizing the PUFA people. They should, criticizing Ray Peat stuff, to just guzzle lots and lots of flaxseed oil and rich seed oils, and they're going to be loaded with cellulite.
Oh,
Cellulite is, one of those disgusting things that happens because of PUFA.
yeah.
That's one of the things, a lot of people will say, well, I eat seed oils and I lose weight and I go to the gym, and they don't understand that you're right. They're fixated on a short term thing where you're not. If you put your body in a huge amount of stress and do all kinds of taxing things, you can get away with eating vegetable oils or doing crash dieting and have a happy time momentarily. But again, you're kind of a fool when it comes to what you're going to do to your body long term when you're in your
Yeah.
50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Who knows what that's going to look like, right?
And it's guaranteed to downregulate your thyroid. Like excessive exercise has been shown to, especially excessive endurance exercise, has been shown to decrease the levels of T3 in the blood. And if you're guzzling seed oils, that's also going to block the T3. So it might work for a while, but you're going to downregulate.
So how does how does that tell people, how does the seed oil block T3 in the blood? Can you explain a little bit about that?
I need to look more into this, but I think that the polyunsaturated fat just basically blocks the uptake of T3. Um, but yeah, I need to learn more about the mechanism.
Right. I saw you shared this tweet from Chris Masterjohn, who I've had on the program in the
Yeah.
past. He says that PUFAs raise vitamin E requirements, suggesting promoting seed oil consumption is an attempt to reduce fertility. You said you can't get this idea out of your mind. What are
Yeah.
you thinking about when you see that? I mean, it's interesting. You know, Chris is not afraid to go into some of the, deeper analysis about the motive sometimes behind the bad actors in our health sector.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard for me to look at it and see it not as something nefarious and as some strategy to try and reduce fertility, especially when you look at the way that dieting is promoted for women and the way that yeah, just this sort of over exercising culture for women, plus the seed oils, plus just all the rampant degeneracy in our culture. You can't not look at that and think that there's something nefarious going on to try and reduce the human population.
Right. Why do you think, so do you think that it's possible that they knew that the seed oils from the beginning reduce fertility, and therefore they push those from the very beginning into the ubiquitous place that they're in? Or do you think it's something that maybe they pushed it with good intentions for decades, and then along the way they figured out some bad stuff and they said, well, actually that's a feature, not a bug for our interests?
Yeah, I definitely think that's possible. And there's also looking into just the mechanisms of vaccines. Hate or Georgia Dinkoff posted a study a while back saying that the spike protein part of the COVID virus and also the vaccine actually is partly constructed of PUFA. And so it's something that they know is deleterious to human health. And therefore, how can they not be using it in order to poison us?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I find interesting is that how can you have a society flourishing if it's going to be poisoned on a mass scale? I mean, you cannot
Yeah.
have clear thinking and creativity and joy and self-reliance. None of those features are going to be able to manifest when you are mass poisoned, right?
Yeah. And I really think you see it in my generation with the rise of especially autism um, is skyrocketing. And you can see the look often in someone's eyes where it's the high serotonin kind of dead look. And it's becoming more common. And I don't even want to know what the next generation after us is going to have to deal with from just the generational effect of these polyunsaturated fats.
You're saying a dead look. I've
Yeah.
noticed that dead look everywhere you go across America. You see people, particularly younger people, with very poorly dyed colored hair and very vapid eyes, just very gone. And that's what you're talking about? Or I mean, what's going on here?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Wow. So I see another quote here I wanted to bring up as food for thought. It says that sick people always want to go back to when they weren't sick, and you can't go back. You have to go forward. And when you go forward, you're going to be deepened by your experience. Um, Karen MCC, what do you think is that getting to? That's at this idea that some people do not want to roll back the choices that they're entrenched in. They don't want to roll back the lifestyle kind of expectations that they've had for themselves to kind of keep going in a certain thing, to exercise a certain way, to eat a certain thing, to have this kind of uh, body goal, body image goal, or whatever. All of this is kind of stuck in this paradigm of trying to return to some kind of better place when you weren't sick. But you're saying in this quote, or whoever this person is, Karen, that you have to find something else better. You can't return.
Yeah. That quote really struck me because I have a lot of regrets over my health journey, there's a lot of things that I wish I hadn't done. But when I think about it now, in those moments when I was really struggling and was wishing I could just go back to before and had never done this thing, in those moments, you don't know what to do. But now it's like I see a new possibility of health and even a deepened understanding and compassion that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't gone through those kind of really dark places.
Right. There's you have a list here of some things, kind of you call them simple, testable, repeatable, improvable points. And we've talked about the first one you mentioned: avoid PUFA and other anti-thyroid foods. 2, oxidize primarily carbohydrates. What does it mean to oxidize primarily carbohydrates?
Yeah, so that idea is, first of all, that means you want to be eating carbohydrates so that you can oxidize them. But
Okay.
then also, you don't want your body to have your blood sugar drop or to get into a place of stress where you'll basically be liberating free fatty acids from your tissues and burning them for fuel instead of carbohydrates and glucose. So the idea is to try and keep your blood sugar from dropping to a place where it'll leave you vulnerable to insults from other areas. So I've heard people mention that if you let your blood sugar drop too much, not that you can never let that happen, but it'll leave you open to getting pathogens, to getting other diseases that maybe wouldn't have happened if you had been able to keep your body in a good homeostasis. So oxidizing primarily carbohydrates can be done in a variety of ways. So you could use aspirin in order to kind of stop the burning of free fatty acids in your tissues or in your blood as well.
How do you, when you're driving around or traveling or whatever, how do you make sure that you're always getting enough so that you don't have a big drop off period of time where you can drop your blood sugar too low?
Um, so I think for improving blood sugar, there's a lot of things you can do, but almost nothing's going to work as well as improving your thyroid function because um, it's kind of just a swing and a miss otherwise. You can do all of these things. You can take berberine, you can um, experiment with a number of things with eating so much protein at every meal, but if you don't improve your thyroid function, you're not going to be able to maintain that kind of steady energy that you would be able to otherwise. So when I'm traveling, I just try to focus on eating good meals. Um, I don't really snack a lot, but my main goal is just to have enough energy consistently.
Do you rely on, I guess, one of the ones that Ray often recommends, Cytomel and Cyno Plus, these types of thyroid drugs?
Yeah, so I've experimented with NDT and then recently started trying Cynomel and Cynoplus. So that's kind of an experiment that's ongoing, but I've already noticed I've been able to finally get my resting heart rate up, which had been something that had not improved over a year. So that's a really good thing.
A lot of people in health spaces are trying to get the resting heart rate down, right? They're trying to make it slow.
Right.
And that kind of opens up a general thought about, like, it seems like within the anti-aging space, there's a more dominant paradigm within that world that wants to slow everything down and make everything really minimalist, right? And this idea, I mean, there's a kind of there's a kind of aesthetic bias in favor of that in our culture. That, we like minimalism, and people buy their apples, they go to these minimalist stores and they like everything, zen, and you go to the Asian rock garden and it's minimalist, and you think, and it kind of has this aesthetic coherence to this idea of eating less and living longer, and slowing things down to like expand your lifespan instead of speeding things up. Why do you disagree with that, as opposed, why is this something that you think doesn't work?
Well, I haven't successfully lived to 100 yet, but I Ray Peat has this quote where he says, "Life is good for you." And that really struck me. He goes on to say in that quote just that there's many people who are saying that life is bad for you and you should be trying to kind of minimize the amount of life that you're experiencing so you can live longer. But I really think that the idea is to become like a child. The idea is to enter the kingdom of heaven. And even if I don't live to 100, um, entering that kind of childlike state, and hopefully eternal life is something that will last forever, even if yeah, I would totally rather do that than be Brian Johnson eating his, bowl of slop in the morning with the vegan thing and avoiding the sun and
Uh,
living a life that really seems to be joyless, unfortunately.
and that's one of the things that I like about Ray Peat's philosophy is that I think it brings back a a dimension to like what you described there, this vision of the kingdom of heaven coming to earth, and like it brings theology into it kind of harmonizes a touching point between the spiritual world and theology and the world of biology and health in a way that I think is very promising and inspiring, and it fits very well with kind of my instincts and my intuition about the purpose of Christianity. One of the problems I've had with a lot of versions of Christianity presented in the public is that they don't embrace joy and a pro body and a pro earth approach. It's about, it's almost like a dour, despairing funeral, and very, very kind of disregarding of the body as something dirty compared to the spirit, which is something better than the body. And that's not Christianity, right? That's not Christianity. That's something else. It's dualism, it's Gnosticism, depending on the flavor of how you look at it. But that's
Yeah.
something that I think, I hope that perhaps Ray Peat's bioenergetics philosophy can be the kind of material anchor to bring the best out of the Christian worldview again.
Yes. Yeah, I'm in a group of Peters who are trying to kind of synthesize Ray's ideas or even just incorporate them into Christian philosophy. And there's things about his metaphysics that tend to, I think, are a little bit off base. He is based on Aristotle and his understanding of metaphysics, kind of rejecting Plato, seeing him as more Gnostic. But I really do agree that Ray Peat's idea of having life in abundance can be kind of incorporated into a robust faith.
The idea of what with life?
Just having life in abundance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think it has a place for an optimistic eschatology too, where you're looking at again, I've said that I think in today's time, people are recovering more belief and faith in an afterlife than they are in planet Earth. So they have more faith in the idea that there's something other, because like near death experiences and other things continue to point that there's some kind of spiritual thing that's different from where we're at now. But there's more belief in that than there is in the idea of there being a a positive view of Earth in 1,000 years or 10,000 years. Everything is very bleak amongst believers and, the secularists as it pertains to Earth's future. And I
Yeah,
think that's
that's
very
strange.
not Christian, right?
Yeah. I always think it's strange because Jesus said, I didn't come to condemn the world, but to save it. And so there's just this idea that the world is condemned and
Right,
that we are subject to decay, but we're also subject to being renewed day by day in the inward man, right?
right, right. Yeah, and I've pointed to the Romans passage about where Paul says that creation is longing for the sons of God to be revealed to set creation free from its bondage to decay, which means that our choices and our actions in history will have a role in freeing creation from the decay. And I think part of that means rejecting the idea of entropy too. I think that has to go, right? That's kind of this false psyop that has robbed people of their ability to think clearly and act in a way that's Christian. If everything's going to hell, what's the point of doing anything? I literally have had Christians online comments when I've talked about finding solutions for cancer right under our nose, and they'll say, well, what's the point? The whole earth is going to be judged and destroyed anyway. We're all going to die. I mean, this is not a Christian viewpoint, but if Christians don't have a Christian viewpoint, who will, right? I mean, that's the kind of strange thing about this, you know? but that's why people, it will take people like when Christianity, I think, goes wrong in a lot of forms of it. I think it will take folks like Ray Peat outside of the conventional framework of Christianity to kind of be a healthy antidote to kind of supplement, to orient the thinking of Christians back into the right direction, so to speak.
And one of the things about Ray Peat, I think really makes him such a great thinker is that he was able to see kind of the ideological shift that was happening during his time and to reject it. Like he chose to forgo a lot of prestige and a lot of fame, a lot of wealth in order to kind of be true to his ideas. And in doing so, he was able to kind of maintain and even push forward these ideas that the church might have swallowed some of that idea that has kind of been pushed, especially in the time since the post-war consensus. So Ray Peat is kind of able to bring back that old way of seeing and his kind of frame and point of view that built on that in a way that the church sometimes misses, unfortunately.
So when you say you're hoping to become like a child, what does that look like? You know, for folks who are not in that Ray Peat world, just what does that actually look like? What does that literally mean to you?
So I heard Nate Lawrence describe the idea of kind of intense exercise, especially running or doing marathons, as trying to mimic the metabolic state of actually feeling good and having good thyroid function. And I think that's a good way to describe it because when kind of that runner's high hits or when you're in the middle of something, it's a feeling of joy and elation that you have. But it really, when it comes from stress, it's much different than when you're actually fueling your body in the right way and having a good metabolism. And so I think it's about having a joy in all the things around you, actually noticing the things around you instead of being absorbed in technology or absorbed in your own pain, even at the world. It's enjoying the feeling of being alive.
How does one know the difference between the good feeling of stress hormones versus the good feeling of a high thyroid or you know that kind of like different source of happiness or joy or whatever?
Well, for me, it's pretty obvious when I'm dealing with stress hormones because I immediately get like really hot, like the histamine reaction and the high serotonin. Whereas when it's a good thyroid and metabolism state, I will immediately feel more relaxed, but also more energized at the same time. So it's kind of that restful state that you're able to reach when you have enough energy.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that that is something that everybody's born with and then it gets impaired with because of environment and trauma and all kinds of things like that, PUFAs
So
that
something that I want to look into more is the damage done over generations and the damage done to babies when they're in utero because of the PUFA. So I really think that even babies born now aren't born in the same state that maybe they were before all these environmental toxins. So I think it's becoming more and more difficult to even understand that state because we're all being born poisoned.
yeah. That's something that I don't know if you're familiar with Brad Marshall from Fire in a Bottle. He's talked a lot about, you know, how kids have today, born today, are having SCD1
Yeah.
hormone switches and so forth from their mothers that basically skews their metabolism from the moment they get started, so they don't really have a chance
Yeah.
in that regard. So
Yeah, it's very sad just to see, especially when you see kids who maybe have autism um, or their parents, or they're having issues acting out because of the physical pain they're in, but you'll see them being kind of medicated by screens or being, yeah, just not allowed to be kids anymore.
yeah. So do you think that Ray Peat's philosophy of returning to a childlike wonder is just an excuse to you know, have like a rebellious no rules for me apply kind of thing? Or what do you think?
So that's something I've really struggled with because I tend to have an anti-authoritarian streak already, but I think it's more about submitting to the right authority, as in God,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
so that so that you can actually think for yourself and not rely on authoritarian structures. So it's this idea of renewing your mind. And if you renew your mind, you're able to then think.
You mentioned there's a group of Christians that are interested in this bioenergetic philosophy. Is there a website or group that people can go to that can be a part of that conversation?
Um, so one of them is starting a Substack right now. I think maybe you could put it in the show notes, I could send it to you, but yeah.
That's very cool. So a lot of people talk about fruit and fruit juices and so forth as pro-metabolic, but then it often ends up always being orange juice. Is there other fruit juices or fruits that people should really pay attention to? Because I know there's a lot of problems with some fruits and starchy fruits and so forth that are not going to be as beneficial.
Well, I love orange juice obviously, but I really also love pineapple juice. Even though pineapple can be a source of serotonin, I still think it has a beneficial fructose to glucose ratio, and it can still have a lot of really great effects. So I really love that. And then yeah, there's a lot of beneficial enzymes in pineapple as well. So I try to eat that pretty regularly. And I still love blueberries a lot, even though they're not the seeds aren't apparently the best in the Ray Peat view, but and blackberries as well because of just the beneficial effects on the microbiome that can happen from the polyphenols in the blackberries. I'm a big fan. So
What about all these like processed juices that you see in grocery stores, like apple juices and things like that? Should people avoid those things, or what do they have?
yeah, I the problem with apple juice is um it can have problems with the microbiome, and because it's a source of pectin, and so it can easily feed the bad bacteria and produce endotoxin. So that's kind of the problem with apple juice.
And pectin is found in all of these, even in the juice form, right? Not just in the, you know,
Yeah.
and pectin is something that can lead to endotoxin. Is that right?
Yeah, and I don't think that means you should never eat an apple again. And I love apples too. I'll eat them.
Yeah.
But I think apple juice itself tends to be a problem for people producing just gas and different issues.
Do you like to eat, do you avoid starches or do you eat like potatoes or rice or things like that?
I definitely do much better with rice than I do with potatoes. I will eat them when I'm with people that are eating them. And they definitely have some good effects too about the starches, but I definitely don't feel as well when I'm eating them as much. So I tend to avoid them more.
Now, anecdotally, are you noticing other people following in a similar way like you, or are you the only person you know in real life that's doing this?
Um, I'm probably, well, it depends on the people. So people who actually trust me or and they don't think I'm crazy will kind of try and incorporate some of the ideas, and other people not as much. But
Yeah. Someone asked me one time a question, and I thought it was, and I don't know the answer, so I'll throw it to you. How do you know the difference between some of these hormones that all have their proper place, but of course, when they're in excess, they cause problems? So someone asked me a question like, well, how do I know when like bad states of mind or behavior that I'm feeling are the result of cortisol or estrogen, serotonin? Like, how do you pick through all of that stack of stuff, prolactin, whatever? Like, how do these different things make you feel so that you know, oh, I'm feeling extra irritable or sad, or I'm feeling bouts of random despair or snippy or whatever? You're like, how do you sort through what those states of being are in terms of like which hormone typically is associated with that kind of feeling?
yeah, so Ray Peat has the amazing quote that his only protocol is to perceive, think, act. And I think the best thing is to get to know your own body and to get to know the responses you're going to have. Um, and to kind of almost isolate a feeling when you're stressed. So you pay attention to how you feel when you're stressed and you know you're releasing cortisol, or a feeling when you know you might have been exposed to endocrine disruptors that are full of estrogen. How do you feel after that? Does it release histamine? Do you feel like a burning sensation in your face? Um, do you feel like you want to dissociate from the situation? That might be serotonin. Um, are you noticing other issues from the estrogen, like water retention or just feelings of irritability? So really just getting to know your own body is probably the most helpful thing.
But do each of them have a kind of a calling card? You said like serotonin makes you feel like you want to
Yeah.
disassociate from the group you're around and kind of withdraw kind of thing. Okay.
Yes. I think that's very much connected to endotoxin as well, because Georgia Dinkoff shared the study where people with high amounts of endotoxin tended to be more socially isolated. So as the endotoxin increases and as the serotonin increases, you tend to be more withdrawn from others.
Was that just that's what introverts that have high endotoxin perhaps?
So that's an interesting thing because I'm a little bit of an introvert. However, I've noticed in times of good health, I find it way easier to be around other people without feeling drained. So that's something I think should be a major focus of increasing your energy to be able to spend more time with other people, and to kind of be even happy to be around other people.
Yeah. So when people wake up and they say, I'm snappy and grumpy, I haven't had my coffee yet, is that cortisol or is that adrenaline
I
or
really think that's low thyroid, because if you have low energy in the morning, that's usually a thyroid issue.
okay. And then so am I correct? I think cortisol doesn't make you feel aggressive, it makes you feel relaxed, right? It's a relaxing chemical, right? Because it's
Cortisol or
cortisol, yeah.
I think cortisol usually tends to be released in times of stress to actually
Mhm.
heighten your senses.
Oh,
So
really?
it
Okay.
tends to make you relaxed.
Okay. And then so serotonin is the one that's going to give you the sedative experience, right?
It can. It has a lot of different effects. So high
It can make you
serotonin can
go
give,
crazy too, right?
yeah, yeah. I posted recently about SSRIs, and just the stories I got from people who have taken them was kind of disturbing. And yeah, it was very hard to read.
Now, why is being estrogen dominant a bad thing? You know, I've recently said that maybe we are battling principalities like big estrogen, but of course, when you say that, someone thinks you're being, misogynistic or something. But it has nothing to do with that, right? What is it? What's wrong with being estrogen dominant? Shouldn't we want to be estrogen dominant? According to our culture, they're telling us that the future is female, and Ray Peat said that too. So isn't aren't they talking about the same thing, or is there something different?
So in order to understand why estrogen dominance is really terrible, you really have to understand the benefits of progesterone. Um, so estrogen itself is kind of in that cascade of stress hormones. It's kind of the hormone of new beginnings, which isn't always a bad thing. But when it's imbalanced to progesterone in that ratio, it really causes a lot of the symptoms that women experience, and even men are starting to experience now too, of just irritability and snapping at people. And if you look at the people who are on the birth control pill,
Yeah.
for example, it can increase just your stress as an organism.
Now, if it's the new beginning hormone, why does it make you snappy and irritable like that?
I think it's really because it's part of that stress cascade. So it's making you less patient even. Whereas progesterone will immediately, I notice this when I take progesterone, it will immediately just calm that stress reaction that I'm having, and make me kind of more level and happy to be around other people.
That reminds me of the saying by Kamala Harris: "What can be unburdened by what has been." Is that the definition of estrogen? It's like
Oh my goodness.
that's the hormone of new beginnings right there. But it obviously, like,
Uh,
it doesn't sound as good as the brand there because it does cause irritability um and
I
it and
think
it
it's also in some ways an anti-fertility hormone because it's in the birth control pill for a reason, kind of to prevent the uterine lining from building up in the right way.
but how does that, so for again, just for the audience sake that's new to these things, how can something be for new beginnings but yet cause drops in fertility? What's going on? How does that work?
So the real problem with it is it causes new beginnings, but also in excess, it'll be differentiated growth. So you'll have tumors, for example, that are driven by estrogen. You'll have a lack of progesterone, which will make you unable to actually carry the baby. Um, it just can cause a ton of issues. And I was really encouraged to hear RFK in his speech recently kind of call out estrogen as well as a problem, which
Yeah,
you won't hear very often.
yeah.
Even in alternative health spheres, they'll talk about giving you estrogen after you hit menopause, or they'll talk about using it to relieve symptoms, even symptoms that I struggled with too. They'll talk about supplementing it. And just to hear someone call out it as part of the problem was extremely encouraging.
And it's hard to think clear when you have high estrogen in relation to progesterone, right?
Yes.
Mm.
I think it makes it very hard to be a calm person to be around, honestly.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I've always said politics is downstream from thyroid. So you can't understand the madness of crowds if you don't know what made them mad in the first place, right?
Yeah,
And
and estrogen will also potently block the thyroid hormone when it's unopposed. So
yeah.
that's another issue.
And so again, just for the sake of argument, the keto people, the carnivore people, aren't they saying that they're getting estrogen under control and getting some of these deleterious stress hormones in check when they do their interventions?
Well, I really think that argument doesn't make sense because the carnivore people, without fiber, you're gonna have a really hard time detoxing estrogen from your system because it'll just be reabsorbed through the bile. And most carnivore people are gonna be constipated. It's kind of just the reality of it. And then for even just keto, say you're having fiber, you need energy for your liver in order to be able to detox. So without that glucose, you're gonna just have kind of a stagnant system.
Mhm. Yeah. So you don't want to have stagnant systems digestively if you want to get rid of excess estrogen.
Yeah.
But do you like the carrot salad and all those kind of classic interventions that Ray has been known for?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the carrot salad. I mean, I even
Mm.
just love the taste of it. And I
Yeah.
also like to do the well-cooked mushrooms as well. Those are also great.
And explain for people why it's important to cut it vertically.
Well, it just helps to kind of separate all the fibers so that they can pass through your intestine and bind up all the endotoxin.
Now, what
And
happens when you chew it? That doesn't do enough of a job for it.
yeah, I think it tends to just help kind of break down a little bit of the fiber when you chew it instead of having it pass through. I don't think it's best to like slurp it like noodles, but
Right.
yeah.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I think all of these things are worth repeating over and over again for folks to understand the utility of these things, so it's not just left as another diet fad. I mean, there's always been strange diets. There was the grapefruit diet. There's all these little gimmick diets that make a lot of money with a book and a guide and a whatever, protein shake and so forth. But Ray was the opposite of that. He wasn't going on Rogan's show and pushing things for kind of like a grift. He was the opposite of that, a true Christian, right?
He
And
had a deep understanding just of physiology and of the
right,
human person,
right,
which was unmatched by any other.
right, yeah. And he had a passion. He had a passion for helping people like Christ. And at the end of the day, that's how you know who's with Christ, is who imitates and looks like his characteristic. I don't care what your dogma recitation is that you can recite. That means nothing compared to actually becoming and acting like him. But I really appreciate having you on. And there's any other thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share for folks who are interested in this way of living and are intrigued by this idea of reclaiming their birthright for joy and having a childlike wonder?
I think it would just be that Ray himself was a big believer in altruism and in people kind of helping other people. And that's something that I kind of want to carry forward into my life as a person in a community, someone who can be depended on and also depends on others.
It's really good. And I think that's something, I've been thinking a lot about how we can get CO2 type therapies available for the sick and elderly
Yes.
for free or very low cost in communities all over the country, and let people, people who have diabetic ulcers on their foot have the CO2 bag on their foot, and people who are having severe pains and so forth and metabolic dysfunction. Because, this idea that CO2 being this master molecule that regulates the thyroid is something that's totally lost in any conversation. I mean, that's just, it's so funny. It's like next level, but it's exactly what everybody was talking about. If you go back in history long enough, you'll see the medical community was talking about how powerful CO2 was. And
But I think it was suppressed at a certain time because they characterized it as being dangerous.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's the thing I would also love to see is just it made more widely available and cheaper for the healing of people en masse, you know?
right. Yeah. And so hopefully I think we're going to move, if we can have the courage to not be afraid to look weird or different, or people judge you because of what you do or whatever, but just actually try to help people, you know, get people access to these affordable solutions, vitamins, you know, it's not about taking a bunch of supplements. That's the thing that I liked about Ray's stuff when I realized that, you know, he's taking things that are ordinary things that the working class family can afford, like carrots and mushrooms and milk. I remember the first time I interviewed him with Tucker Goodrich, and I was like, "So you mean raw milk, right?" And he's like, "No, just regular milk." And I was like, "Really? That's all you have to drink?" And you're like, "Yeah, that's just
Yeah.
get get some regular milk, and that's a good start."
And
So,
another mind-blowing thing just about his philosophy is the number of people who've been able to reverse chronic lactose intolerance just by
mhm,
improving thyroid and progesterone.
right.
Incredible.
Well, very good. I really appreciate your time, and we'll put a link to people to be able to click your account on X, and anything else you'd like to promote. We'll be sharing that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.